This is Cressida Hall here. I'm the General Manager of AIMA. I just wanted to introduce today's webinar. We're really thrilled to have three really eminent doctors, Dr. Penny Caldicott, Dr. Sandeep Gupta and Dr. Taufiq Binjemain. They will be talking about the way forward from COVID-19 and what we can do as an integrative community to ensure that our health and the health of our communities is well looked after. I also wanted to say that we started these webinars on the 26th of March, and the reason for starting them was really to provide a place where doctors and practitioners and people in the medical profession could come together to learn from each other and form a community and share information. They're not set up as a definitive guide on COVID-19 or anything like that. But we really want to create a safe space where people can come together and learn. So just saying that, sorry, I've got a thunderstorm going on in the background here. I should probably end this introduction and say the usual housekeeping things. Firstly, we have a question and answer tab in the middle of your menu bar at the bottom of your page. This is where you can leave questions for the panellists. We also have a chat room, which has often got a pretty lively chat happening in it. Please don't leave questions for the panellists in that because they can't see it. But please do join that chat. And also, we're hoping during this webinar to actually have a poll, because we've been doing this for quite a while now, and as society is opening up, we're thinking people may not have quite as much time to be watching us weekly as they already have been. So we're going to be asking your opinion on how often you think we should be holding these webinars. And as usual, always feel free to drop me a line at admin@aima.net.au if you've got any ideas for webinars or something you want covered, or just to tell us how wonderful we are, because we really like getting that. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Penny Caldicott, who'll start this show on the road. Thanks.
So welcome everyone tonight, and also, like Cressida said, we're really interested in your feedback about how this is going for you. We've got some other subjects, but we've also got people who may be very passionate about speaking about a particular issue at this time, and we're very open to suggestions of future topics for the webinars. And it's such a great time to be sharing, and there's a lot of interaction, as many of you already know, during the webinars. So we're all learning a lot from each other. I hope I can be reasonably coherent. I've just finished one of those big days, which many of you probably have also. So try and get my head back around this topic. And so I'm just going to speak for about 10 minutes and then hand over to Taufiq and then to Sandeep, and we'd like to have some time for questions and discussions as well. So it's interesting, isn't it, that this virus, this pandemic, has really put a spotlight on all kinds of things in our world that I guess we probably knew weren't going so well, but are now so much more obvious to us. And so we are really kind of looking at this world going, where are we, what's working, what isn't, and we hope really that we're not going to go back to where we were, but we're going to create something different, which is really what this is about, in moving forward. I'm sure that, I suspect I'm not going to say anything too profound that you guys don't already know tonight, but it's still worth, I think, having these discussions. So, and of course, this slide you've seen, the numbers have changed, obviously. At this point, there were only 22K of the novel coronavirus in terms of death, and now that's obviously changed, but it's still lower here than many. We had a webinar, some of you might have been here a couple of weeks ago with Jimmy Wallenbin, and he talked about really the big picture, and he spoke to us a lot about systems thinking and the limitation, the many limitations we have in many areas of our life, of our health system, political system, socio-cultural system in terms of how we think about things and how simplistic we are often in our thinking. So we know that systems thinking is very integral to the practice of traditional medicines. They're never really just about taking herbs. They're never really just about diet. They're really about assessing that whole person within their environment. And we hope that that's what most of us are doing in integrative medicine as well. And of course, we're learning all the time to do this better and better, but it's what we really want to be promoting in integrative medicine. But this simplistic childlike ideas of causality, that's what Jimmy was speaking, quite a lot about. And we've seen that happen as people have been assessing what's going on with COVID-19. It's because of this, it's because of that. No, it was this, and I think that what the discussion he opened up was what many of us are thinking, which is this is the result of many things in our society, and particularly when we get down to looking at why people are dying, there are some specific holes within our health system that we all know about. Systems biology, I think we understand what that's all about, but systems biology is part of it, and it's what we try and look at these complex biological systems from the individual to the bigger picture, and it's how we should be seeing the whole world, but unfortunately we don't do that very well. In fact, even in medicine, conventionally, and how we're taught is we're pretty bloody hopeless with that, aren't we? So we're like, yeah, we've got a little problem with reflux, so we're just going to pop in a PPI, but we won't worry about the rest of the digestive system, let alone the rest of the body, and how this will ultimately affect digestion, absorption of nutrients and stuff like that. And so we are taught to think in a very, very simplistic way. I'm not saying that these interventions aren't useful for a period of time or that they're totally useless, but we need to be thinking much more broadly. And that's what we do in integrative medicine, but it's what we need to be doing everywhere. So it's important to kind of come back to health outcomes because really only about 16 to 18% of health outcomes are dependent on healthcare, and most of them are actually dependent on the socio-cultural determinants. And the big question that Jimmy actually asked us as well is, are we contributing to this? Because it's great to look at the individual, it's great to be holistic about the individual, it's great to work with other practitioners, but if most of the determinants of health are outside of that, are we having a big enough influence in this sphere? And that's something that Sandeep is going to talk to us about after, because there are some, clearly some different types of interventions that we can be thinking about at the moment, as opposed to just kind of keeping social distancing happening and waiting for a vaccination. I'm not saying there's not a lot of research being done. There's heaps of really interesting research out there as well, but the basic message that we're getting is that. And then there's all the questions that I've already alluded to on what is the focus on this virus unearthed about all kinds of things. So in health, what the three, apart from age alone, the three leading kind of risk factors have mostly to do with metabolic syndrome, as we all know, so hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and diabetes. And so this is the area that we're doing so poorly in, and we've all, talked about Alzheimer's and cancer. It's like diabetes type 3 and 4. And this is the area of the kind of huge, pretty much epidemics, so we could call them pandemics of chronic disease, because they're happening in every country, even in the third world countries. So it is highlighting what we're not doing, what we're really not doing well. Well, our political systems, it would be great entertainment if it wasn't so serious, right? Because there's so much so many crazy things going on. There's also some we saw some good bipartisanship initially in Australia, but you can see that kind of falling apart now. We can also see lots of things that are happening behind the scenes while we're all kind of at home, isolated and a bit fearful about the situation, things that are going on around gas in Australia, around control, lots of things that are happening in the US and all around the world. That people aren't having as much of a say in as they would be having otherwise. Power, of course, it's interesting, people, I mention facts to people sometimes and they go, is that a conspiracy theory? And I'm like, no, things that are facts are not conspiracy theories. Actually, facts are real, and, maybe some of the things that we're hearing so commonly out there are more conspiracy than many of the facts that we're talking about. Science has been very cooperative and very amazing, but so amazing also that we're in a position where people are saying, yes, there is, we're going to get immunity when we have contact with this virus, and no, actually we've no idea whether we've got immunity or not. And now this issue is becoming quite a big one, because this is one of the things that's making people so frightened about going out and keeping us really confined in so many ways. And then there's all that kind of like, there's all these possibilities for change, which are actually really exciting, which we'll talk about as well. So when we think about systems, I guess, like if we're thinking about people at the moment, this whole thing about social distancing, I totally understand it. It's been the right thing to do. You could argue whether we've kind of dodged a bullet in the shorter term with what we've done, or what actually was going to happen in Australia with the virus. We're not totally sure, but the social distancing has been important. But what does social distancing mean in the longer term, or even in the shorter term, to so many different groups of people? So I love the young people that I work with. I can see how much they're suffering, and their peers at this stage, and being physically with their peers is so important. And so a lot of young people are really suffering, not only because their future looks really uncertain, that everyone's talking about a recession or a depression and no jobs for youth, and many of them have lost their jobs, but they're also feeling, quite alone in this, and not very well supported. I have an older woman who I look after, and she's, quite at risk. She's 86. She thinks she's not very well, but man, is she doing well for 86. But when I said to her, look, at the beginning, you can't cuddle your grandchildren, she's like, yeah. And then her daughter-in-law said to me, well, actually, she said, I'd rather die. So, the nourishment that we get from being with people and actually being close to people is just huge. It's part of what keeps us alive. And I know that it was, in the old days of the Eastern Bloc communist countries, where there were a lot of children babies were being born and put in orphanages. And they found that a lot of the babies that weren't actually being touched and cuddled, that not only did they get very sick, but many of them died. That it's so important, the physical contact is so important. So my mother, who's probably at the highest risk, she might be online, so sorry, Mum, but who's got some cardiovascular disease and is 82, I think she's 82. She's been isolated most of this time, but she came up when she was able to last weekend, and, I know we weren't meant to hug, but we couldn't help each other. We couldn't help it. And, the amount of, what we receive in those hugs is so important, and actually even more memorable when you haven't been having them, and the contact that we have and what we share with each other is really important. I'm going to go into that in a little bit in the next slide. Mental health is obvious. I mean, we've all seen our patients suffering. Particularly, I spoke to a guy tonight who's got autism, lives on his own, but he's got a lot of OCD, and he's so afraid of going out, and there is no way I can talk him around it, because he's really got it stuck in his mind that he is at absolute risk of going anywhere. And I think there are, quite a lot of people like that. So emotional and spiritual wellbeing, I know that Taufiq is going to talk more about this, so I won't spend too much time on it. We know that one of the biggest determinants of chronic illness is actually social isolation. So we do need to be really careful, Of course, we can be discerning in how we do it, but we have to make a real effort to make sure that people are not socially isolated. And, the last one, I can't read, I've got to move this. Yeah, so fear and anxiety, which we've been talking about, disempower. So when we're in a state of fear, we're not we're basically stuck in our brains, and we're really disconnected from who we are. We're disconnected from our body and disconnected from all that we can be connected to outside. And so we're very limited. It means that we make different decisions. We have different responses to things. We might become quite agitated and angry and distressed and anxious. And I'm sure we've been talking to lots of people like this at the moment. So fear is something that we don't want to promote. I'm sure you've all had patients who say, should I worry about this? And I'm like, I'm never going to tell you to worry about anything. But particularly this, we have to be reasonable where, maybe we're in a little bit of a honeymoon period at the moment. We don't know as things open up what's going to happen, but we can be discerning and also not be fearful at the same time. Okay, so this is, you've probably all seen this. This is just from HeartMath. I'm sure you've all heard about HeartMath, but just in case you haven't, the HeartMath Institute is located in the west coast of the US. It's a technique that's been used all around the world. There's been a huge amount of research. I know the first time I was exposed to it was through the RACGP when they ran a resilience workshop maybe 10 years ago or something. So it's really simple. The basic technique is a really simple one where you use breathing into your heart. So imagining that you're breathing into your heart to create a nice even variability in your heart rate, and that we know that this nice even variability in the heart rate sends messages to the brain that help with mental coherence. Very simple technique, but it's taught us a lot about actually what the heart and the atrial peptides can do when they travel to the brain, and then what and the effect that they can have on brain coherence. But also, really interestingly, my heart rate variability can affect your brain coherence if you're standing close enough to me, and vice versa, so that we're constantly interchanging through this kind of electromagnetic messaging from our heart. And you can see there it says the human heart's magnetic field can be measured several feet away from the body. Well, several feet is much less than 1.5 metres, isn't it? So the 1.5 metre thing I totally get. But with discernment, we can be closer to some people depending on the situation. But it's really important to realise that this physical closeness is important for so many reasons. And of course, this slide, you've all had a good look at it now. The negative emotions can create nervous system chaos and do, obviously the opposite than positive ones. And we can boost our immune system by these positive emotions. So anyway, lots of information about HeartMath. If you don't know much about it, go read more about it. And this is a beautiful picture of not just the electromagnetic vibration of the heart, but of the whole body, and obviously how we can influence each other when we're close to each other. So we don't have to be conscious of it. It's just happening all the time. So I came across this yesterday, and I think I was pleasantly, well, more than pleasantly, I was very happy to see this. So the New South Wales government, with something called the Agency for Clinical Innovation, have put out all these resources for the pandemic kindness movement about spreading only kindness. And it's actually got a huge amount of resources and stuff that I hadn't imagined would come from the New South Wales government or this. And so maybe I haven't looked very much. Maybe I'm looking now because of what's going on. But I think these resources are really wonderful. And so this is what they're talking about, connecting health workers and community at all these different levels. And for each level, there's a whole lot of resources. And I thought I was really taken by the love and belonging. So I looked at those resources. And there are some really great resources there. And this is how they describe love and belonging and why it's so important, and how we can build this love and belonging in our workplace and with our colleagues. And of course, it's probably the most important thing that we have to offer our patients at the moment as well, is a sense of security that they can have, that we'll be there for them, that we're here to listen to them, that we can love them in whatever distress they're in. So that they feel also the security to come to us when they need something, so that they're not left in such an isolated state. So these were two of the resources. I thought they were pretty cool. So you can have a look at those, but have a bigger look at all of these. I would encourage you to, and also send other people to this website to have a look. So I mean, they're even talking. Let's have to move this. So looking at threat and opportunity, and how we can bridge things that are happening in terms of opportunities. And also, you know, in the first one, the art and science of looking up, I thought that was great, about transforming our brains and bodies, relationships and experiences of the world. So there's some really good stuff going on out there, and hopefully we keep using these kind of resources to move forward. You guys can read this. This is just a quote from Arundhati Roy. I'm not sure if I pronounced the name properly, who you probably all know is an amazing Indian writer. And this is her take on the pandemic in an article that she wrote called "The Pandemic is a Portal." And if you just put that up on Google, you'll get the whole article. But it's really about, you know, are we actually, you know, do we really want to go back to normality after this, since we've identified so many issues? Or are we going to walk through this portal with a kind of fresh mind and do things differently? Which is what we all hope that we're going to do. So what now? So I guess we've been exposed to the best and the worst. So we've been exposed to lots of fear-mongering, lots of limited thinking, some really crazy stuff coming out of governments, particularly in Brazil and the US. But we've also been exposed to a lot of kindness and connection. And they're the things that we want to be focusing on, because those are the things that are more transformative. It's really important that we ourselves live in a sense of a connected purpose, because when we're connected to really who we are inside, then we have a great capacity for making changes around us, small and large, both equally important. And this, we've all heard a quote from Margaret Mead: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And we know that from historically, that it's always been a small group of committed and enlightened people that make positive changes. So we don't need everyone. And I've talked about what our patients need from us at the moment. And I have to say that I feel that our patients are responding really well to this. And I always end with this photo of my beautiful son, Mickey, who's been a really amazing influence in my life, taught me so much. But he's got this incredible appreciation for nature, and nature always, for him, like all of us, brings him great connection and helps him in states of quite a lot of anxiety and other things that inherent in who he is. So I'm going to hand over now. Thank you very much for listening. And I'd like to hand you over to Taufiq. I don't know how many of you know Taufiq, but he works in the NIM Centre up on the Gold Coast. He's a specialist in cancer, and he's going to talk to us about the psycho-emotional effects of COVID-19. So I hope I haven't stolen any of the things you're about to talk about, Taufiq, but I'm sure there's heaps more. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Penny, for the wonderful talk. So, yeah, I'm just going to focus just a bit more on the psycho-emotional health and COVID-19, because I think apart from the physical effects of it, there's also, I think, a massive community level psycho-emotional effects. Hold on. Okay. I mean, there's so much stress and fear around these events, you know. I mean, because of the lockdown, the uncertainty of what this virus is, is this a new virus or manufactured virus, or where's the virus coming from, and the actual effects of the virus. So there's a lot of sort of uncertainties, which creates a lot of stress and fear. And we know from our in many studies, stress and fear has a proven direct effect on our immune systems. So. And of course, it affects people differently. I mean, chronic stress, as we know, affects a lot more than acute stress sometimes. And typically stress affects more in the older population, and they are less able to terminate their cortisol production in a response to stress. So And in animal studies, we have done actually, I mean, some of these experiments obviously can only be done in animals, so obviously it would be illegal to do it in humans, but they induce stress and using mild electrical shocks in mice, in rats, and to see what's the effects of severe stress. And what they found was that in severe stressful situations, the mice have a decreased motor activity, increased fear, increased the feeling of helplessness. How they measure that is actually trying to give the mice options to go into two different doors to escape, and they just can't be bothered to escape because they just feel totally helpless. So that's the assumption for it. They have increased fatigue. Serologically wise, they have increased plasma TNF, which is our pro-inflammatory cytokines. They have adrenal hypertrophy and spleen hypertrophy as a result of this severe stress. So there's behavioral changes and also physical changes as well. And these are the direct effects of severe stress. And so far, I mean, in terms of the COVID-19 influence, I mean, we know from past coronavirus pandemics or outbreaks in like SARS and MERS virus in the past, about a quarter to a third of the population reports high levels of anxiety and worry during this pandemic. So that's quite a significant amount of the population, right? And in this current pandemic, they found at least more than in China, when in the first country that's reported this, more than half of the population has reported sort of moderate to severe levels of psychological impact. 16% has moderate to severe depressive symptoms, 28% severe anxiety symptoms, and about 8% severe, moderate to severe stress levels. So it's highly impactful if more than half report moderate to severe psychological impacts. So according to the Blackdog Institute in Australia, I mean, they published their sort of advice or recommendations to look out for at-risk groups in the current situation. And these would be like people who have pre-existing anxiety and mental health issues, and healthcare workers, especially frontline staff, especially. I mean, luckily in Australia, the numbers have come down quite a lot, but in some countries, I mean, because I've been in communication with other doctors from the US and Europe, some of them have seen like massive amount of body bags, just the white van that carries the dead bodies out of hospitals just in 24 hours of round trips non-stop. So this, if you have that many patients dying, especially I think that was in New York, I mean, it really affects your psyche as a doctor, as a front of staff, and also nurses and all the staff included. So they are at risk of like severe burnout, depression, feeling hopelessness. Of course, if you look at people placed in quarantine, that's also can be like Penny mentioned earlier, the disconnect from other people, from your own family members or grandkids, grandparents, is also highly impactful. And as we know, there's a lot of people that have been laid off because of the lack of work. You know, a lot of shops been closed, restaurants been closed. So all these people are at risk, and that's quite a big number in our population. Their recommended strategies is to offer practical support. I mean, obviously, most of them don't need any sort of medical intervention, just practical support, like able to I mean, unfortunately, the government has some sort of strategies to support this, like the JobKeeper support, some sort of financial support whilst during this period of there's less work, for example. Of course, a lot of the source of stress is the information. There's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of disinformation, and there's a lot of information overload. This creates a lot of confusion, and of course creates a lot of stress. So having good quality information about what's really happening is really useful. There's also telehealth mental services. Fortunately, the government has also supported like telehealth payments for psychologists. There's also a lifeline. So to help them actually still see patients with the physical distancing still upheld. The government also have to understand the negative impacts of prolonged mass quarantine. So they have to take that into consideration as well, because there can be a second wave of not a virus, but a second wave of like mental health issues, really. So that has to be the consideration when thinking about sort of keeping the borders closed or keeping quarantine being prolonged. So there should be also adequate mental health support for healthcare and frontline workers. And also there's been reports of like severe PTSD with COVID patients who've survived the disease after being either quarantined or being in intensive care or in hospital. They've have like severe PTSD of perhaps they might think it's a close call. And there's also some reports of having delirium and other psychological issues post-infection. It's still very early stages, not sure whether the virus also affects the brain as a brain infection, but there have been some reported psychological symptoms as well post-infection. Right. In my practice, one of the things that we work a lot, focus on, especially in skin cancer patients, is dealing with trauma and stress and fear. So we work a lot with Professor Peter Stapleton. In fact, we're running a clinical trial with our cancer patients to help resolve their trauma and stress and fear, because we believe that this would have stress and trauma have a severe negative impact on the outcome of in health, especially in cancer. And I believe it will also affect patients with COVID and in the general population as well. So Professor Peter Stapleton is a clinical psychologist, and she's also a senior professor in Bonn University, and she's probably one of the world gurus in EFT or emotional freedom technique or tapping. I like that technique, tapping, because it's clinically validated. It works really well, and it works quick, and it shows really good results. So if you're not familiar with what EFT is essentially, I suppose, a combination of acupuncture points or acupressure points combined with NLP. So how the mechanics of it is that when you activate certain acupuncture points, you change your brainwave pattern from beta brain waves, which is like the normal brain waves during regular mental alertness, to theta brain waves in a split second. So theta brain waves are the state, the brain state where you are either in deep meditation or in dream state or in a hypnotized state. So by just tapping or activating these acupuncture points, your brain immediately goes to theta states, and this is measurable with a EEG. So whilst you're in these theta states, you are highly suggestive in the sense that then NLP techniques can make a serious impact into, like, in a sense, rewiring your beliefs or your perceptions. Well, but the proof of the pudding is what does it work or not. So we've done, Peter Stapleton have done work which was published last year, which has shown that she is one of the first, actually, it's a major study in my view, because it actually one of the first studies to show physiological or biological markers. It's not just questionnaires like in most psychological interventions. So what she found, and so the key points in her study is that anxiety, after like a 4-week session, anxiety levels have dropped by 40%. Depression has dropped by 35%. Symptoms of PTSD has dropped by 32%. Happiness increased by 31%. Immune system markers, which is very important during the COVID period now, is boosted by 113%, and cortisol levels dropped by 37%. So this is nothing to be laughed at. It's really, I believe there's a lot of drugs that can achieve this level of changes within 4 weeks without any side effects. So I think it's a very important tool in our arsenal. And she also did another trial which was published this year. It's a randomized control trial looking at the effects of EFT, psychoeducation, and versus no treatment. And what we found is that in the EFT group, the cortisol levels dropped by 43%, compared to that in the psychoeducation group, either counseling or CBT, it only dropped by 19%, and the no treatment group, the cortisol level actually increased by 2%. So I think that shows a major difference in terms of comparison, looking at EFT and psychoeducation, for example, like CBT or counseling. So that's a major drop in cortisol levels. So this is the basis of what we do. So I think putting that together, you know, just to look after our patients' sort of psycho-emotional health, which I think is really, really important. Just the basic strategies like offering practical support is important, understanding who's at risk, but also I think then if there's symptoms of anxiety and stress and as such, I mean, we can also consider incorporating EFT into our practice, or if you're not familiar with it, perhaps referring to someone who's familiar with it before, you know, looking at any other medical intervention, which, like I said, is very useful, effective, quick, and durable as well. It is long lasting. I mean, they don't relapse into symptoms of depression, anxiety. So with that, I think that's my 10-minute spiel. So I'll pass the baton to Sandeep.
Okay, great. So really, as Penny and Taufiq said, you know, we've really got a delicate system of our community and our local communities and our world community, if you like. And this pandemic has caused on many levels a disruption. And it has shifted many things about our lives, all the way from, you know, the way that we meet with each other to, you know, the level in which we connect to each other, and all of those different effects have wide-reaching effects on our lives. And so one question I ask myself is, as a result of this disruption, which I'm not calling a good or bad thing. I mean, everything, and I was talking to Taufiq about this last night, that, you know, whenever there's something that has a sort of a negative aspect in one area of your life, there's usually going to be a positive side of it somewhere as well, if you're willing to be there for that change and for that message. And so one of the big questions I'm asking myself is, how can we really refocus now after this period of disruption with this outbreak and this pandemic? And I think that refocusing is in, you know, three major categories. It's on a personal level, and Taufiq's talked about the emotional and psychospiritual levels. There's also just the simple physical level and just the simple organization of our daily lives. But then secondly, as practitioners, how can we refocus our client community so that we can assist them perhaps from moving from a place of fear or anxiety or distress more towards a place of empowerment? And how can we also support the world community to perhaps have a more holistic response to this outbreak, which is going to actually help us as a world community to take on the positive benefits that could come with this disruption to our lives, and perhaps be less likely to take on some of the negative effects that could occur if we stay in a prolonged fear response. And so I'll talk about these individually, and I'm guessing this will just sort of organically move into a question and answer as we move along this discussion. And so here are some of the things that I think about on a personal level, and you can see on the peripheries of this slide, I've got personal, emotional, or really physical, emotional, and psychospiritual, I think is what I meant to notate on this slide. And some of the simple things that I think about in terms of just the physical immune support that is needed for myself personally at the moment includes vitamin D. And of course, you know, we like to think of these things in a very reductionist way, you know, like let's take a vitamin D supplement, for instance. However, I kind of see vitamin D as a marker for sunlight and fresh air, and the importance of sunlight and fresh air in our lives. And That's one thing that as a result of lockdown and as a result of having this social distancing policy in our country, that some people, and I noticed that some people have tended to stay indoors a lot more than others, and others have tended to continue getting sunlight and fresh air even while lockdown was being enforced. And so for those who haven't been getting out and getting contact with nature and sunlight and fresh air, this is a really good time now to look at re-engaging with that. And if you can get that, let's say several times a week or even every day. I'm very lucky to be living on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, where going to the beach at least 3-4 times a week and getting my bare feet on the ground is something that I can do. And so I guess this goes a lot beyond vitamin D. But as in addition to that, I do take a supplement as well. But I like to think of it as vitamin D in the whole context of getting connected with nature and getting connected with sunlight and fresh air. And I do think that is the best way if possible. I guess keeping in mind that there do seem to be some people in the population who tend to absorb the vitamin D well through sunlight, or to create the vitamin D rather well through sunlight conversion of cholesterol in our skin. And then secondly, a really important area that's had a lot of research is the importance of zinc. And also other ionophores. And one thing that has become clear, that wasn't clear to me prior to this pandemic, is the importance of using what we call ionophores to help zinc to get into the cells and to be most effective. And so the more information that's come out, we've seen that, early on in the pandemic, chloroquine and then hydroxychloroquine were investigated with a lot of enthusiasm as being pharmaceuticals that could be a major weapon in this battle against this outbreak and this virus. And despite some of the more recent reports, I still have optimism about these compounds. And one of the important effects that's come through or shone through this pandemic is that they actually help as a zinc ionophore. In other words, they help to transport the zinc into the cells so zinc can be best utilized. And as almost everyone here knows, zinc is really a cofactor for almost all of the enzymes for the immune system. It's just such a multipotent and wide-reaching nutrient. And in many clients I've found through the years that you can be giving them bucket loads of zinc, but they don't appear to get the levels up, particularly the intracellular levels, up to the ranges that we want to get. And so using zinc, whether that be as a supplement or just also ensuring sufficient dietary sources, which also goes back just to the importance of having a really excellent whole food diet. But in many cases, it also means supplementing zinc. That's particularly if you have the condition known as pyroluria. But giving it along with nutrients such as quercetin, I do think it also has the additional benefit that it keeps the mast cells of the body calm. And it appears, some researchers showed that the mast cells of the body may become hyperactive, and that may be one of the abnormalities which leads to the cytokine storm, which leads to some patients developing a really severe manifestation of this condition of COVID-19. And so, even in Paul Marik, the well-known intensivist who had studied intravenous vitamin C and sepsis, one of the key parts of his protocol has been zinc and quercetin. And so I really think that's a key thing that we can be doing and perhaps considering for many of our clients as well. Green tea extract is an example of another ionophore that helps us to get zinc into the cells. So I think that's a really, really important one. Thirdly, the importance of vitamin A has really shone through during this period for me, and how specifically immune boosting and also antiviral vitamin A is as a compound. And so I think this is a really beneficial supplement, and it's probably a really underestimated or underutilized supplement, I believe, in integrative medicine in general. And for everyone, even just being on a tablet of vitamin A a day can really give a lot of boost to a certain part of the immune system, and then the cytokeratin, which really helps our cells to have some protection against these kind of viral antigens, which are very heavy in the population at the moment. And then number 4, vitamin C, and that's another compound that's been studied in great depth in this condition. And one of studying vitamin C quite a lot over the last few years, one of the things that's really surprised me is how common it is to just have frank deficiency of vitamin C. And there's been research done particularly in hospital populations, in intensive cares and surgical units, and they've found that a very large proportion, if you check these patients with serum vitamin C assays, a very large amount of these patients are actually deficient in vitamin C. Now, whether you call that scurvy, whether you just call it a general deficiency state. And I see vitamin C as being part of just the general concept of how much fresh fruit and vegetables are you getting in your diet as a regular thing, and also how much oxidative stress is your body under. And so probably for many people, the big key is just to look at how much fresh, raw, or even cooked vegetables, particularly organic vegetables and even fruit to a certain degree, are we getting in our diet. And if you do get a large amount of that, some well-known authors are suggesting around about 9 cups a day of vegetables. And if you can get somewhere near that in the diet, you're going to get quite a lot of vitamin C. Now, in a time like now, it may be prudent to also add an oral supplement in on top of that. And for some people, doing somewhere around the 1 to 3 gram mark is quite useful as an addition, just to enhance certain aspects of their antiviral immune system during these times. So vitamin C is really, really important. In the case of an acute attack of COVID-19, there does appear to be some preliminary evidence to suggest that intravenous vitamin C could be a useful intervention. And certainly people like Paul Marik, the intensivist, has that as a central part of their protocols for this condition. And it's certainly not the only part of it. There's certainly many other things. He does believe that hydrocortisone is very important. He does also believe that using heparin or low molecular weight heparin, also known as Clexane, is a really important thing to look at, because the more and more the research is coming out, it appears that there's a very strong hematological side to this condition, to COVID-19. And so if people are getting a more severe manifestation of this illness, then looking at their ability to withstand clotting, if you like, and keep their blood relatively thin so that they don't get into more of a state of DIC or coagulation in general is very useful. So then lastly, just thinking about adequate sleep and hydration. These are some really simple things that, and speaking on a personal level, I found that, with the general, I guess you could say, community-wide anxiety that's gone along with this outbreak, I would say that my sleep patterns have been affected by that. My hydration patterns have also not been as strong during this pandemic. And so these are all really simple things that we as individuals and also our clients can focus on, just to refocus on some of these core principles of integrative health. And so that's really some of the things that I've been thinking about on a personal level. Of course, it's much more than that. It's also some of the things Taufiq talked about, looking at my personal emotional reactions to this, thinking about how I'm dealing with fear. And, at certain times for me during this pandemic, fear has been quite strong, and other times not so much. And it's interesting to really look at it at almost like waves of the ocean, that there will be moments where those waves are stronger and other times where the the sea is going to be more gentle, but really just keeping an eye on the overall ocean and the weather of the ocean, and being willing to give some support to yourself if those waves of fear are starting to come up at any particular point. So then reaching out from there and moving on to talking a little bit about our client communities. And one of the things that I did when this pandemic first came out was hold a number of different Facebook live sessions on social media, as I could almost intuitively feel that there was a level of distress and anxiety on the part of my client community. And a number of people said that they felt that was helpful, just to reach out to them and share some of my thoughts and share some reassurance. And a lot of my client population have a condition called CIRS, or other related conditions such as mast cell activation. And just even conveying to them that I don't believe, particularly if they're following their program in sincerity, that there's any greater risk to them of having a severe manifestation of this illness. And for a lot of people, they felt that was helpful, just to put their mind at rest. And then so just over the last few weeks, my personal focus to clients has been on refocusing back on their long-term health needs. And really what we don't want to happen is that for people to get so distracted by this viral outbreak and to start neglecting their long-term health needs. And I have seen certain of our patients who have gone off their protocols and so on, and that's probably not what we want right now, although it's totally understandable. Some people have had major upheavals in their family. Some people may have lost jobs. Perhaps the kids have been at home for a prolonged period of time, and that may have reshuffled what's going on in their family in general. And so just encouraging our patients to refocus on our long-term integrative health needs, and realize that if you are following your integrative health program, you're doing one of the most important things you can do to protect yourself from this viral pandemic. And that really our long-term health goals are still very, very relevant. And that's been something that I've been trying to get out on social media and in newsletters and so on from our clinic. And so that's something perhaps you guys might want to consider. And, another thing that has been that there's been a big shift towards doing telephone and telehealth consultations. And for a period of several weeks, we were doing almost exclusively phone and Skype and Zoom consultations. However, at this point, with the relative quietness of cases in Australia, I believe that the RACGP is actually now encouraging GPs to tell their clients, or to encourage their clients to come into their rooms when possible and when practical, to restart that practice of coming in face to face, because there are certain things in a consultation that can't be replaced on a phone or a telehealth consultation. And so, slowly, we're not saying that everyone has to start doing that straight away. And some people may like to continue doing phone or telehealth for now. But if slowly there's a trend for clients to start coming in again face to face, then that also helps us to connect with them, more directly on a face-to-face level, and through that we can have more frank conversations with them about dealing with the changes that have come up with this outbreak and the disruption that has gone along with it. And for some people, as Taufiq mentioned, this has really had a major impact on their mental health, and it's important that we identify that early and provide people with the support that they need in order to start coming back, to start calming down again, and to start de-escalating from perhaps a heightened level of anxiety, which that's probably going to be the pattern that will be present in a lot of people, that there's just a greater level of anxiety and agitation. And one of the key things for people to de-escalate is to feel like they have a lot of support around them, as Taufiq said. and Penny as well. And so being there to be that support for our clients at this moment is really, really important. Giving them some basic advice around emotional support. And, you know, one specific piece of information that I believe is very helpful is to reiterate to clients that it's totally normal at the moment to have a certain level of anxiety. There's a lot of uncertainty. None of us know for sure how this is all going to play out over the next months to years. And so a certain amount of anxiety is certainly to be expected. However, you know, there's no need for this to turn into panic right now, because, you know, there really is a pattern in Australia of control right at the moment. And as long as we just stay to a level of you know, general concern and precautions around this, there's nothing to say that, you know, that things are going to go out of control anytime soon. And then also just giving the general information around immune support. And, you know, for some clients, I've been adding that into their protocols, you know, for instance, just emphasizing vitamin D and A and C in a greater way for a certain period of time. For some clients, also using specific herbs that appear to assist with immune support. And that all appears to have been very beneficial and has helped people also to feel supported through this period. And then thirdly, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the world community and, you know, being a support to the world community right at the moment. And you know, I've talked about ourselves, you know, supporting ourselves at all levels. I've already talked about educating our clients and also the broader community. So, you know, when I do things like giving general talks on social media, often there are many other people on there other than just the direct client community who we're able to interact with. And then, you know, another piece which I wanted to bring into this discussion is communicating with politicians, because, and you could ask yourself, well, what's the reason for that? Why do we need to get political? Can't we just do our own thing at our individual levels? And I think my thoughts around this right now is, no, maybe we need to get political at this point, because I believe that if there's not a strong voice for, you know, from the population, and particularly the community which is interested in holistic and integrative health solutions, that I think there's going to be a high risk that politicians and those who are tasked with the decision making as far as this outbreak goes, to engage in a response which is largely governed by fear. And, you know, anytime anything's a reactive response, it's generally going to be much less holistic, and it's going to be much less of a systems approach. And I believe that the more that we can get our voices out there to politicians, then they can realize that it is really important for us, you know, for us as practitioners, that integrative solutions are considered as part of the response to this outbreak. And as individuals, you know, from our clients, it's also really important for them to communicate to politicians that, you know, their choice in healthcare is very, very important, and that they want to have a choice in the way that they address this, you know, their health during this outbreak and in the process of returning to normality. And I think the more people who can basically share their voices with politicians, the more politicians will realize that there is a significant amount of the population who want to have a more holistic approach to this, and who want to also have, you know, their own personal choices respected during this period. And therefore, I think that will then counter some of the pressure that politicians are likely to be facing from other bodies such as the WHO and so on, to have a more reductionist approach to this outbreak. And then, you know, so that's one thing to consider. As Cressida says, it's something, it's all up to your personality, if that's something that you may want to engage with. So AIMA is creating some templates, and that will include a template for letters from practitioners to politicians, and also a template for our clients or patients to write to politicians. And Cressida will probably talk about this at the end of this call and how you can access these, but I believe she's going to upload them to the website, or if not, she can certainly provide them to you via email. But finally, I just want to emphasize again this concept of being the change, and that was a big one of the biggest and most impactful quotes that Mahatma Gandhi had many years ago, that, you know, really ultimately he says, you can't just change the world, you have to be the change that you want to see in the world. And so I really believe that personal transformation is the starting point. And the more that we can get our own personal regimes, if you like, and that of our client community around us into a kind of harmony, if you like, then the more that's going to radiate out from there. And I believe that we each can have a very strong effect on the world and really influence the way in which this outbreak is handled along the path to normality. And, you know, it's going to be a very interesting phase, and I think all of us can have a big impact on that. So that's all I wanted to share. And so I'd like to now invite Taufiq and Penny to pop back on and move on to questions.
I think number one's for you.
Oh, okay, right. Are you seeing low vitamin E levels in people with MCAS? The honest truth is I haven't been checking them, but it's an interesting thought. I'll throw a question back at you. Have you seen anything to suggest that vitamin E levels may be a problem in patients with mast cell activation syndrome? Because it's not a connection that I have made, but if it's something that you have, then please let me know. To be honest, vitamin E is probably the neglected one out of the fat-soluble vitamins for me. I look at vitamin A, D, and K a lot, but I don't think a lot about vitamin E other than cardiovascular disease. So I'm interested in it, and if you've found that it does have or it appears to have a strong role, or I should be looking at it further, then I'm happy to do so.
There's a question for you here. It's actually under the chat.
Okay, yeah.
From Dr. Homer Hirantner. It's, what do you suggest for personal transformation, Dr. Gupta, please?
Well, I was talking, I've had a couple of really good conversations about this over the last day or two, but the number one thing I would say right at this period is to try to be totally present to what life is putting in front of us right now and all its aspects. Another way of saying that is showing up in entirety. That's what I'm getting at the moment. And one of the, I think there's a temptation, and I know I'll just talk about myself. I notice in myself, there's a temptation to just switch off and kind of go into more of a, shall I say, a participant approach to life. And I feel that when I go into that mode, that's when the growth stops. But if I can show up as much as possible, then that appears, that seems to help me personally to engage with my journey of growth as much as possible. Now, there's one caveat on that sometimes it can get pretty intense, especially if you're addressing all of your own emotions that are coming up through this pandemic. And especially if you're an empath and you're feeling everyone's emotions around you, including your clients. And so sometimes I think it's totally legitimate to have what we call a conscious tune out. And so, so that can take the form of watching a movie, or, going and having a lovely hot bath, or whatever it might be. Like, the self-care side is still really important. You need to balance it with that. But I think one of the key things is to try and say to yourself. One of my mentors, Jeff Brown, who's a really good emotional author, he said to me, one of the keys about that is to make it a conscious tune out, and say to yourself, okay, look, I'm going to go and watch a movie right now, and I'm going to tune out for a couple of hours. But as soon as that's over, I'm going to tune back in again and be present again to life. And what I'm not doing is allowing myself to just get carried away or swept away with the waves of distraction. So that's my thought, but I'd love to hear Penny and Taufiq's thoughts.
Yeah, look, I would agree. I think that the interesting thing when things get really busy and almost really overwhelming, particularly in the beginning when everything was changing so fast, we didn't know what we were meant to be doing, and everything was changing in our surgeries on a day-to-day basis, is, the benefit of being that overwhelmed is you just have to stay present, right? It's like one foot in front of the other because you don't know what's coming next, but actually if you stay present, you can always find the solutions that you need. And I think I also would... and the other thing actually about being isolated, which I think is interesting, not isolated, but not being able to move around, is that normally it would be this time of year that I'd be going with my husband to France where his whole family is, and we're doing a big walk, and I always look forward to that. But this year there was this kind of like a little bit of the silver lining was I wasn't rushing to get ready for that and being frustrated at still being at work and getting everything together and being uber busy and overwhelmed. And I wasn't flying to Melbourne or Queensland for meetings or conferences. And so there was an ability to really be present because I wasn't just thinking about what's coming up next all the time. So that's been an interesting thing. I'm sure a lot of people have experienced that in this time. And I agree also with the nurturing, because I think being... unless we nurture ourselves and we have downtime and we pray or we meditate or we're in nature or whatever it is that makes us feel good and feel connected, then we're not any more kind of linked and in communication with the wisdom that we carry individually and collectively. And I think the more calm we are, the more present we are, the more that wisdom can guide us, and we can come up with a lot more kind of creative solutions to problems, and also be much more present for those that come to be with us. Taufiq?
Yes, I think what Sandeep was saying is having intention. You're saying being consciously sort of tuning out is having the intention to tune out and having the intention to tune back in. So I think sometimes having the right intentions to clearly outline your intentions in doing something. I mean, for myself, in terms of like what Sandeep is saying, being the change that you want to be. I mean, just in terms of the practical sense, we are trying to get some clinical trials running with regards to COVID. There's a lot of work so far, but hopefully, I mean, it has been approved by ethics committee and things, but it's just all the other groundwork in terms of getting approvals and the logistics of it, all those things. So, I mean, that's what we're trying to do on our end, because it's trying to push the envelope of not just drugs, but other sort of supplementation, vitamin D, zinc, vitamin C and things. So when this thing's up and running, perhaps we can announce it a bit more, but that's what we are currently doing at present.
Thank you, Taufiq. I think what Sandeep had finished with in his talk is really this opportunity now for us to collectively lobby. So I think you mentioned, didn't you, Sandeep, about the letter?
Yes.
Yes, okay, that will be made available. And I think it would also be great to do a petition type of thing. If we got lots of doctors and other practitioners to sign on, then I think that could be delivered into the right hands. But I think we definitely need to have a voice, and maybe not just on the issues of what support our immune system, but other issues that lots of doctors are starting to bring up now.
Yeah, I think it's our community needs to have a voice, and in a sense, the other voices are being stifled a little bit at the moment. As you're seeing, there's a lot of censorship going on and so on. And, I think we can do it in a diplomatic way, and in a way that politicians may want to consider listening to.
I think it's Cressida here. I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that as the integrative medicine community, we really have something to offer our politicians, to offer our policymakers, and to offer government. We've got solutions to problems that they know are coming. And so I think we need to be working from that position of knowledge and power and innovation as well with all of that.
I think there was just one question that was unanswered here, guys, if you don't mind us jumping into that one, which was Michael Elstein saying, maybe it's a rhetorical question, but it's a question nevertheless. And it was, is this virus and its method of transmission telling us something about the way we've abused and ravaged our natural environment and the fellow creatures which inhabit our planet? So my question to the panel and the audience is how much this is calling into question our consumption of the flesh of animals and the extent to which we're destroying our planet by, for example, driving our motor vehicles. Any of you like to have a crack at that?
Yeah, it's a big one, isn't it? I could definitely, nothing happens in isolation, right? We've been talking about systems, biological systems. And if you listen to the webinar that Jimmy Wallenbin did, he did actually talk a lot about that. I mean, it's hard to make a direct link with some things, but it doesn't mean that there aren't links through the systems that are all interrelated. But I know Christabel in her talk last week on the mitochondria talked about how mitochondrial membranes and mitochondria can become quite fragile and go into, she talked about spaghetti and meatballs, that when mitochondria go into the spaghetti shape, they're quite fragile, but they also have quite a big role to play in immunity, but also in the past have been studied, I think, with SARS and with the first one and other conditions that can actually generate the cytokine storm. And that these mitochondria are influenced by lots of environmental things, including air pollution, heavy metals, EMFs, all that kind of stuff. So certainly the environmental factors will have played a part in people's kind of more severe reaction and in the cytokine storm. And I guess it's pretty obvious when you look at some of the places where people have got really sick, like in Queens and New York, for example, where people are living very close together, where there's probably a lot of air pollution, a lot of EMF pollution, probably poor nutrition and all the factors that make us more vulnerable.
It's almost like that question resembles the question a cancer patient asks themselves when they first ask the question as to why have I got cancer? And you could say, in a sense, this is like a collective cancer, in a sense. And in some ways, as the integrative practitioner, I see that my role is just to facilitate them asking the questions and coming to their own answers, rather than having the answers. So I guess that in some ways it's a rhetorical question. Is this thing calling us to go vegan? I don't know. It's your personal exploration. Is it telling? Is this situation calling us to stop driving motor vehicles? That would seem pretty extreme in some ways. But if for you, I would think that one of the first things would be just how much EMF we're using. Yeah. The amount of EMF that's being blasted out. I would think that would be maybe more of a first thing to explore as a society. Taufiq, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, EMF is definitely one aspect, especially stronger EMFs, higher amplitude EMFs, and also if it's in the closer vicinity. If it's like EMF source like a kilometer away, it's like, I tell patients, like, I suppose, like playing a speaker, right? I'm playing like a hard rock metal music, something that you don't like, perhaps. If it's a kilometer away, it's just a bit of annoyance. But if it's just next to your ear or every 300 meters apart, you really get annoyed, So there's certain EMFs you can't, you don't hear them because it's out your audible range, but it does not mean that your cells can't feel it, So if your cells are perpetually irritated, every 300 meters, it creates a weakness, where then viruses then take the opportunity, in a sense, perhaps their job is to remove weak cells, But if you have a lot of weak cells, then that means a lot of your cells get taken out. So it's something that we have to be aware of,
So thank you, everyone. I think we probably should wind up because it's we aim for an hour. We've done an hour and 15 minutes,
yeah.
but it's been great, and thank you so much, Taufiq and Sandeep for being with us, and thank you our AIMA admin people, so Joanna and Cressida, for organising all of this for us. And I think next week, you said, Cressida, we're going to be listening to Professor Mark Cohen.
Yes, Mark's going to be doing a presentation on heat and heat as a treatment, and particularly heat as a treatment for coronaviruses. So he'll be in conversation with our own Tim Ewer. So that'll be a great event, I'm sure.
Awesome. And Cressida, would you mind just also touching on how people can take it further if they want to think about writing to politicians or considering that possibility?
Yes, so I've drawn up a brief dot point document that outlines the kind of things that you could say in a letter to a politician, and that's something that I'm going to have Sandeep and Penny cast their eyes over to make sure that we're covering many of the possibilities. But I think the thing is that we're a large community and our voice can be heard, and we found this out with the Medical Board of Australia public consultation, in that, you know, we're not just a large community, we're an active and motivated community. So we need to garner that now and get all those people again to be talking to their politicians, to be talking to their local members, to be talking to the ministers for health, to be talking to the chief medical officers and saying, hey, we have solutions for you. You know, thank you for the great job you've been doing so far, but now we're at a different stage and we need to plan for the future, and let's not lose this, what Jimmy Wallenman calls invitation to change. Let's not fritter this away. Let's actually look at how we can transform our health systems and what we do. And I think the voice of the thousands of people can be heard. The voice of a small organisation like AIMA can be heard to a certain degree, but when we have that power behind us, then that makes politicians sit up and listen. I think there's other advocacy work that we can do, but I think at the moment that will be our first focus. So as I said, there's this sort of letter template that I will put on, I will email out to everybody who's attending this webinar. I will also put it on our website probably, and maybe a link to it in our newsletter so it goes wider than the people who registered for tonight's website. I've also put together a list of health ministers, because remember in Australia we're a federation, so we've got many different health ministers, and also a list of a place where you can find local members, and I've included New Zealand in that list as well, of course, because we're a trans-Tasman organisation. And I think, you know, never forget the opposition in all of our countries as well, because one day they will be in government. And if we can get into their health policies things that are about integrative medicine and about treating the whole person, then, hey, when they get elected, then it'll happen. So I think that's it. Is Sandeep?
There's just a quick question of, were you going to do the poll that you mentioned?
Oh, shivers. I forgot the poll. Too late. I'll do it as a MailChimp. Oh, I'd set it up and everything. I was looking forward to doing some new technology. Damn. I'll do it. I think I might do it as a mail out in the newsletter, which is going out in a couple of weeks' time. Or if people just want to drop me a line as well at admin@aima.net.au and let me know if you're available weekly still. That's the thing. Bummer. Okay.
Great.
Guys, thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.